What do you mean you have her in custody? I listened to the person on the other end of the line. But there must be an explanation. I'll be right there. I hung up the phone, grabbed the jacket for my suit and my briefcase, and walked out of my office. Yvonne, please hold my calls for the rest of the afternoon and shift my appointments, I told my secretary as I passed her desk. I jogged out of the building and jumped into my car. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that a mistake had been made and I needed to get to the bottom of it. Hi, my name is Mason. Have you liked this video and channel yet? If not, you are missing some amazing stories. After you've liked this video and subscribed, tap that notification bell so you'll never miss another story. I remember it like it was yesterday. I decided to leave work early and head to the park. I thought a bit of sunshine and fresh breeze would help with the migraine that rumbled in my head. With my legs stretched out, I placed my hand behind my head and leaned back. The weather was overcast and the breeze was cool. Suddenly, I felt someone trip over my legs and a small ouch made my eyes fly open. My eyes fell upon the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I never believed in love at first sight, but then and there, I knew she was the one for me. I extended my hand. I'm so sorry, are you okay? She took it and I helped her onto the bench. I noticed that her knees were bruised. She stared at me.
I'll be okay, it's just a little bruise. I wasn't looking where I was going.
Your knees, do you need me to take you home or to the doctor to get that cleaned up?
I live just a block away, I'll be okay. Nothing a Band-Aid can't fix.
She smiled and walked away. Over the next few days, my mind ran back to the beauty I met in the park. Her ocean blue eyes and smile that could light up any dark place etched in my mind. I should have insisted on dropping her home, or at least getting her phone number or even her name. Do you think that would have been too much? One afternoon at the supermarket, guess who was walking towards me pushing a cart? It was her. I wasn't about to let this chance pass me up, so I approached her. Hi, I don't know if you remember me. I rubbed my hand on the back of my neck nervously, hoping I wasn't making a fool of myself.
At the park, right? I still have bruises from the first time I met you. Not easy for a girl to forget.
She winked. I laughed. Making last impressions is what I do. My name is Mason.
I'm Eden.
We continued to shop together, and by the time we left the supermarket, we made a coffee date. We decided to meet at the coffee shop for our first date. I showed up with flowers and chocolates in hand. I looked around the shop and Eden waved at me from a corner booth at the back. Hi, these are for you. I handed over the gifts.
Mason, thank you, you didn't have to.
I know, but I wanted to. I smiled. Have you ordered yet?
No, I was waiting for you.
That was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. Eden and I went on a few more dates before we decided to become a couple. Eden was loving, considerate, and it seemed as though she didn't get angry ever. She always looked for ways to bring a smile to everyone's face. She volunteered at the orphanage as well as the Salvation Army. She definitely was a gem to be treasured. I'd like to meet your parents, I mentioned one day while we were having lunch at a restaurant. Eden looked at me worriedly.
My parents aren't the easiest people to get along with.
I've been dealing with challenging people since I took over my father's company. I'll be okay. This explained why Eden never allowed me to meet her at home. Eden sighed heavily.
I'll see what I can do.
I didn't press the matter as I realized that the conversation made Eden uncomfortable. You see, Eden still lived with her parents. She wasn't allowed to move until she was married or at least engaged. About 2 weeks later, I pulled up to Eden's and she exited the house. I removed 2 bouquets and a bottle of whiskey from the passenger seat before landing a kiss on Eden. This one's for you. I handed her a bouquet, which she accepted graciously. Eden looked nervous. I squeezed her hand. It'll be okay. She nodded solemnly and we walked towards the house. As soon as we entered, she called out,
Mom? Dad? Mason's here.
A tall, slender woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun emerged from a room and addressed Eden.
It's very unladylike to shout like that. Where are your manners, Eden?
Eden's face turned as red as a cherry. I stepped forward and extended my hand. Good evening, ma'am. My name is Mason Pierre. Eden's mother ignored me and addressed Eden once more.
Go and get the table ready.
Eden shot me an apologetic look and ran off towards the kitchen, followed by her mother. The rest of the night didn't get any better. Mr. Jones, Eden's father, came out when the table was set and dinner was being served. He was a chubby, balding man with a mean expression plastered on his face.
So you brought home another one, huh?
Mr. Jones said as he cut into his steak.
Is he going to use you like that last one and then dump you to marry a model?
Well, you know, Eden has always been mediocre. A mediocre job with mediocre pay. She needs to take up her role in the company as vice president. I didn't do all of this work for my only daughter not to be a part of it. But Mom, I don't...
Mrs. Jones waved her off.
I know, you want to do something meaningful with your life. Blah, blah, blah.
That entire evening, it was Eden against her parents. By the time she walked me to the front door, her eyes were red, and I knew she was on the verge of breaking down in tears. Would you like to go for a drive to clear your head? Eden shook her head and forced a smile.
I'll be okay. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?
Before I could reply, she closed the door. I walked away from the house thinking about Eden and how to get her away from her parents. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next weekend, I invited Eden to spend the weekend with my family and I. My younger sister, Judy, was coming home from college for the weekend. As we pulled up, Eden turned to me.
I hope they like the gifts I made.
I leaned over and kissed her. They will love it, and they'll also love you. Come on. Eden and I were barely out of the car when my parents and my sister bombarded us with welcoming hugs.
Welcome, Eden. We've heard so much about you.
Mom said as she steered Eden to the house.
She's really pretty.
Judy nudged me in the ribs and smiled.
I wonder why she's with you.
Ha ha ha, I said sarcastically before I shot Judy a smile. Once inside, Eden handed my family the quilts she'd made them. Everyone loved them. That afternoon, we played board games, ordered pizza, and Eden even made her famous banana bread. Everyone fell asleep, and I stole Eden away to the back porch swing. I kissed her. Are you enjoying yourself?
Yeah, I am. Your family is amazing.
She lowered her eyes.
You're so lucky. I wish I had a family like this.
You can. I pulled out a small black velvet box from my pocket and knelt in front of Eden. Eden Jones, will you make me the happiest man alive? I know we haven't known each other for long, but will you marry me? She threw her arms around me with tears in her eyes.
Yes, I'll marry you.
My family tumbled out the back door.
She said yes. I'm so happy for you, Mason.
Mom hugged me, then Eden.
Finally, I'll have a big sister to confide in.
You did good, son. Eden, welcome to the family.
The next few weeks, Eden and I prepared for our wedding. I also gave her access to my credit and banking cards so she could get whatever she needed for the wedding. She also started a new company that focused on the education of orphan children. Of course, being a great fiance, I invested to show my support. How much, you ask? I invested a sum of $50,000. I mean, why shouldn't I? Her business was going to help orphans get a better education. Everything was going great in our relationship. I even asked Eden to move in with me and she agreed. I was just happy to get her away from her awful parents. As I said, everything was going great until I got that phone call. You know, the phone call I got at the beginning of the story? When I got to the mall, I headed straight to the detention area. What's the meaning of this? My eyes glared at the security guard outside the door.
Sir, you need to calm down. Your girlfriend?
My fiance.
Your girlfriend was caught trying to steal a $10,000 bracelet.
There has to be a mistake. I'd like to see her, now. The security opened the door and we entered.
Oh, Mason.
Eden hugged me and she burst into tears. Babe, what happened? Through her tears, Eden explained that a fire alarm went off in the store while she was trying on the bracelet. When she heard the alarm go off, just like the other people in the store, she ran to safety. I looked at the security guard who confirmed that the alarm did go off. You have the bracelet, why not just let her go?
Sir, it's out of my hands. The police are on their way.
If I paid for the bracelet, will this mess go away? The security guard got in contact with the store owner. He agreed that once I paid for the bracelet, that Eden is free to go. So that's what I did. About 2 weeks later, I told Eden that I was working late. Upon arrival, I noticed that all the lights were off. All the lights in my home were never off. I rushed towards the front door. It was unlocked. Eden? Eden! I called her name and flicked every light as I entered the rooms. When I flicked the light of the bedroom, there she was tied to a chair. I rushed over to her. Eden, baby, are you okay? My hands trembled as I loosened the knots. She looked dazed and started to mumble something, but I couldn't understand what it was. I called an ambulance and the police, and they arrived about 15 minutes later. The ambulance took Eden to the hospital, and I followed as soon as I was dismissed by the police. On the way to the hospital, I called my parents as well as Eden's parents to let them know what happened. The doctor told us that she was unconscious, and they would let us know when she was awake. My parents and I sat on one end of the waiting room, and Eden's sat on the other. After a few minutes of glaring at me from across the room, Mrs. Jones got up and approached me.
You need to send Eden home at once. Never has she been attacked at home. I want her home at once.
Mom stood up and stepped between Mrs. Jones and I.
You don't think Mason is responsible for this, do you?
This time, Mr. Jones answered.
Of course he is. A man is supposed to secure his home. Your son wasn't able to do that. He is not to be trusted with Eden.
Dad chimed in and stood next to Mom.
Maybe if you were a better father, she wouldn't have wanted to run away from you. Eden is grown up and allowed to make her own choices. You people are delusional.
The next few minutes resulted in a fierce back-and-forth argument between my parents and Eden's. It probably would have gone on forever if a nurse hadn't threatened to kick us out if they didn't stop. By the time we actually got to see Eden, it was 5 hours later. I wasn't surprised when she agreed with her parents that she should move back home, at least until we got married. It would take years before Eden broke free from her parents' manipulative ways. I promised to add more security cameras and change all the bolts on the doors. At least the wedding was still on. The day before the wedding, Eden and I decided to meet at the park, the place where it all began. I prepared a picnic lunch for the both of us, and we planned to meet at the park for 12:30. At 1 p.m., Eden still had not arrived, and I was worried. I called her phone, and it went straight to voicemail. At 1:30 p.m., I drove to her parents' home to see if they knew where she was. I knocked on the door and waited. I was surprised when a stranger opened the door. "Hi, good afternoon. Is Eden in?" The man looked at me strangely.
There isn't anyone here by that name.
"Is Mr. or Mrs. Jones here? May I speak with them?"
Sorry, no one lives here by that name.
The man closed the door in my face. Just then, my phone rang. It was Judy. She told me that her check for school was declined and asked if I could look into it. I hung up and wondered about Eden. At the bank, I was told that everything from my credit and debit cards were withdrawn. I asked them how that could be when I didn't authorize anything. They told me that it was taken out by a Miss Eden Jones. My heart stopped. Eden had been toying with me all this time. But that wasn't the least of it. When I got home, everything was gone. The neighbors knew we were getting married, so they assumed we were moving to another house. Eden stole everything. You'd think I'd be upset. The truth is, I'm still in love with Eden. She was actually the best girlfriend I've ever had. Eden, if you're watching, I just want you to know that I love you. I'm sure we can work things out. Please, babe, give me a call. I ran back outside, my heart hammering in my chest, and surveyed the area. My eyes searched wildly for her. She wasn't there. How did she slip away from right under my nose? This did not make any sense. I felt something at the back of my head, and a voice from behind growled, "Don't move." That was the last thing I heard before I was knocked unconscious. Crazy, isn't it? Minding my own business and wham! Continue to watch my story and you'll see how I ended up in that predicament. It all started a few months ago. I'm not a very good-looking guy, or at least that's what I thought. When I met Samara, I was actually kind of, well, shy. She made the first move and asked me out on a date. At first, I thought it was a trick, or even that she had lost a bet, or it was a dare. But then I realized she was really into me. I didn't waste time in asking her to be my steady girlfriend either. I knew I couldn't get better than her. At a very young age, Samara's parents passed away and she came to live with her Uncle Henry, who was a scientist. That was supposed to be a temporary situation, but Samara didn't have much family, so she made Uncle Henry's home her own. Samara and I were total opposites. Where I was shy, she was outgoing, and the most popular girl in school. All the jocks at school lingered on her every word because of her beauty, and the nerds lingered on her every word because of her intelligence. Even though I knew I was dating out of my league, Samara only had eyes for me, which made me feel special. On the eve of my 16th birthday, Samara called me.
Hey Anton, sorry for calling so late, but what are your plans for your birthday tomorrow? I was thinking maybe we could do something together?
It's okay, I was just heading to bed. Well, my parents and I usually have dinner as a family, but I guess we can do something tomorrow night and I can get together on Saturday evening.
Okay, great. You can pick me up at 6:30 and I'll treat you to dinner.
Sounds good. Samara and I chatted for a few minutes before we hung up. Next evening, I picked Samara up at 6:30 and, as always, with a bouquet of flowers. She placed it in a vase before we headed to the car. I was a bit eager for our date tonight as I didn't know what to expect. "How's Uncle Henry?"
You know,
She looked a bit uneasy, then shrugged it off.
always working on the next new thing. He sent you birthday greetings though.
She said as I opened the door for her to get in. "And what about his niece? Did she send any birthday greetings?" I smiled mischievously and wiggled my eyebrows.
Well,
She pulled me close.
I heard from a very reliable source that the niece has something very special planned. But that can only happen if the boyfriend gets behind the wheel. We don't want to miss our reservations.
She giggled before she pushed me away playfully. I laughed and jogged around the car. I opened the car door and jumped in. Samara gave me the name of the restaurant, Jennifer's. When we got to the restaurant, Samara and the staff made a big hullabaloo about my birthday. The cake with the singing, there was even a live band who came to our table and played a song for me. Of course, when the birthday kiss was shared, the entire restaurant cheered. My face was red with all the attention. After dessert, Samara pulled out a box from her purse.
And last but not least, this is for you.
Her eyes sparkled lovingly. I took the gift-wrapped box from Samara and opened it. Inside was a gold wristband with my name engraved. I can't accept this. This is way too expensive. I pushed the wristband back into her hand.
Anton, I want you to have it. You are the best boyfriend I've ever had. You've always been there for me, and I just wanted to show you a little appreciation.
She took the wristband from the box and placed it on my wrist.
I want you to have it. Please don't tell me that working extra shifts at Lola's with Patrick breathing down my neck was all for nothing.
Samara shuddered. Thank you. I was still hesitant, but I didn't want Samara to feel bad. I've just never received anything like this before. After a few minutes, we called for the bill and we left. I dropped Samara home and thanked her for the night. I kissed her goodnight and watched as she walked to the front door. I drove off when she was safe inside. I looked back at the wristband inside. If I knew then what I know now, I would have never accepted the 16th birthday gift. That gift changed my life forever. Over the next 2 weeks, I hid the wristband from my parents because I knew they would tell me to give it back. However, I always wore it when I went out with Samara. Hey, I walked up behind Samara one afternoon outside the library. She spun around, eyes wide.
Hey.
She forced a smile. I held her hand and looked at her concerned. Are you okay?
I'm fine. Are you ready?
I nodded and we left for the mall. While walking through the mall, I noticed Samara got startled from sounds and looked over her shoulder numerous times. This behavior went on not just at the mall, but for a few days after, and each time she said she was fine. I wanted her to open up to me, but I also needed to give her time to do it at her own pace. One evening, Samara showed up at my front door. My parents were out at the time.
Hey, can you drop me off at Aunt Uncle Henry can't take me. I know it's last minute.
She wrung her hands as she spoke. Sure, no problem. Let me just grab my keys and my jacket. In the car, Samara gave me directions to Aunt Tia's, who was about 2 hours away. We've been dating for 6 months and Samara never mentioned Aunt Tia to me. She looked out the window while I focused on driving. After about 15 minutes, I broke the silence. Samara, are you okay? I glanced over at her before I refocused on the road. She looked at me, her eyes filled with fear.
There's something I need to tell you.
She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. Her voice shook as she spoke.
Uncle Henry is after me.
I shot her a confused look. After you?
Yes, I took something from him, and he wants it back.
So why don't you just give it back?
It's not that simple. I also don't have an Aunt Tia.
What? So where are we going? I tilted my head as I looked across at Samara.
I'm not sure. I need to figure out a way out of this.
She shot me an apologetic look. Samara, you're not making any sense. At this point, I was a bit annoyed. Why did she lie to me?
I hid the chip in your wristband, and I think my uncle knows you have it, so he's after both of us.
I pulled the car over to the side of the road. I took the wristband off and handed it to Samara.
There's a lot at stake if he has what is on that chip.
Samara took the wristband and shoved it into her purse. So then why not go to the police?
Because I don't want anyone to get hurt.
But you hid the chip in the wristband you gave to me, I yelled in disbelief.
Look, Anton, I'm sorry. I panicked. If you can get me to Pointe-à-Pierre, I'll be able to take it from there.
There was an intense silence in the car. I was about to say something when I decided against it. I started the car and continued to Pointe-à-Pierre. After about 30 minutes, I said dryly, I have to get gas. She nodded as I pulled into the gas station.
I'll go in and pay for gas and get a bottle of water. Do you want anything?
I shook my head. She hopped out of the car and disappeared into the store. I slammed my hands on the wheel frustratedly. I can't believe she got me wrapped up in all this. 15 minutes went by and Samara did not exit the store. Where is she? She should have been back by now. My eyes caught something in my rearview mirror. Was that a person? Were we followed? I sighed in relief when a cat came into view in my rearview mirror. I needed to get Samara. She was in there too long. I jumped out of the car and ran into the gas station. I looked around and Samara was nowhere to be found. After describing Samara to the cashier, I asked if he saw her. He said no. I ran back outside, my heart hammering in my chest, and surveyed the area. My eyes searched wildly for her. She wasn't here. How did she slip away from right under my nose? This did not make any sense. I felt something at the back of my head, and a voice from behind me growled, "Don't move." That was the last thing I heard before I was knocked unconscious. I woke up feeling as though someone in my head was kicking and screaming to get out. I blinked a few times as I looked around, trying to figure out where I was.
Thank you for joining us, Anton.
Uncle Henry drawled. Where am I? Why am I tied up? I struggled violently against my ropes. There were 3 other men in the room.
You are safe, for now. I'll let you go if you tell me the location of my niece and my chip.
Your guess is as good as mine. She bailed on me at the gas station, and she also has the chip. I glared at Uncle Henry. Uncle Henry walked up to me briskly, grabbed a handful of my hair, and yanked my head back.
I don't believe you heard me. Where is my niece and my chip?
He snapped. I don't know where she is. My voice was strained.
Ronnie! Yes, sir!
One of the men stepped forward. His eyes grew dark as his lips curled into a lopsided grin.
Help Anton remember where the chip is, and by extension, my niece.
With that, Uncle Henry walked out of the room, and the 3 men walked towards me menacingly.
Anton, Anton.
Someone shook me and whispered in my ear.
Come on, Anton, wake up.
I opened my eyes as wide as I could. I felt a metallic taste of blood in my mouth. One of my eyes was almost swollen shut. I had cuts and bruises all over my body. How? I said weakly as she untied my hands and legs.
My uncle used this place a few years back for one of his experiments. It was just a good guess.
How did you get here?
I saw your car stranded on the gas station and I used it. Now enough questions, let's go.
Samara helped me up and tried to support my weight against her body, but I tumbled to the ground in pain. Just as Samara bent down to help me, I grabbed the ropes and pushed her onto the chair. Before she knew what had happened, I had her bound to the chair. She struggled against the ropes and looked at me in horror.
What are you doing?
What am I doing? I snarled angrily. You decided to plant a stolen chip in my wristband that you gave to me for my birthday. Then, you showed up on my doorstep and asked me to take you to your Aunt Tia's, and like the good boyfriend that I am, I was like, okay, sure. Look at my face, Samara. Look at it. I continued. And you dare to ask me what I'm doing? I never asked for this. I didn't deserve this. You should have told me the truth up front and let me decide if I wanted to get mixed up in this. Now it's too late for that. Tears ran down Samara's face, and I looked at her in disgust. Oh, please, save yourself the pity party. You caused this yourself.
I didn't take you to be a coward, Anton. I thought I could trust you, but I was wrong.
She spat. Trust? You want to talk about trust after you lured me out of my house under false pretense? I cleared my throat. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to meet with your uncle. Samara screamed and pulled hard against the ropes.
You can't give him the chip. You can't.
I opened her purse and got my keys and the wristband. You think I can't hand this over to your uncle? I bet you $100,000 that I can. At least your uncle was honest with me. I can't say that about you, can I? As I turned and walked away, Samara called behind me.
If Uncle Henry gets that chip, nobody will be safe.
I laughed cynically as I turned and faced her. At this point, whatever your uncle does with the chip is his business. But I'm not going to go through everything that I did tonight and leave empty-handed. Oh, and by the way, your uncle told everyone you went away to visit your Aunt Tia in another country, so no one is coming for you.
No!
Samara screamed. Before I exited the room, I turned off the light and locked the door behind me. I arrived at Uncle Henry's house about an hour later. As promised, he handed me the cash. He also had his men clean the interior and exterior of my car to make sure that Samara's prints were not on it. They also erased my GPS just in case anybody thought to look at it. I kept the money hidden from my parents, and as soon as I left school, Uncle Henry asked if I wanted a job at his lab, which I accepted. In my short time on this earth, I've learned 2 things. The first is just because you love someone, that does not give you the right to put them in difficult situations and demand that they help you. The second one is to keep your friends close and your enemies closer.